thank you all for coming to this session today by Stage 2 Startups. This is our first session talking about coaches, although we actually have had a session talking about board of advisors and board of directors. And we're looking at coaching from a very wide perspective, if you will. So we're looking at individual coaches like Win. We're looking at coaching from the perspective of programs like accelerator programs or growth programs, which is what Deborah does. And then we're even going to talk a little bit, or I will try to talk a little bit about accountability or peer support circles, because in our research, we've even had people recommend that we try to set up some peer support circles ourselves. So because they find that there's not enough peer support circles for people over a certain age, the age of which I will not mention because it differs by the person. But in the meantime, I am going to introduce our two primary speakers, and then I'll give you a little summary of my background and why I have the founder perspective. So, and then if Emily Smith-Calbick, our moderator, shows up, I will let her know. I will let her then become the moderator. So let me introduce Deb Boulanger. Deb Boulanger is the founder of Launch Lab and the host of the Life After Corporate podcast. Launch Lab is an accelerator for women entrepreneurs. Deborah, is on a mission to close the revenue gap with women business owners. Deb has taught and advised hundreds of aspiring women entrepreneurs to make the leap from corporate to entrepreneur and replace their six-figure paycheck. And she has a secret program to help you do that. Actually, not so secret. She's going to tell you about it. Win Sheffield is a career coach in private practice in New York. After 20 years at Citibank, I'm going to ask, you know what, I'm going to try to mute everybody because I think there's somebody having their dinner or something, and I need to mute you.
There we go. That's
okay, thank you.
quieter.
Okay, Win Sheffield is a career coach in private practice in New York. After 20 years at Citibank, JP Morgan, and PricewaterhouseCoopers, where he has assisted his clients to develop and implement strategy, Win became a certified career coach through the 5 O'Clock Club. He has studied counseling at General Seminary and Myers-Briggs at the Young Institute. Win has spoken and taught career courses extensively in and around New York City, and I believe he has like a permanent spot, it seems, at the New York Public Library, where I found him, although I didn't know him earlier when we used to twirl around some ballrooms together. So that is Deborah and that is Win, and they will expand on their background and their programs. My name is Betty Wong, and I am the co-founder of Stage 2 Startups. We are probably the only organization in the US at the moment focusing on people who are 40 and over who want to become entrepreneurs. And we work out of New York City. And last fall, we actually hosted the first Founders Over 40 Unconference, which had a global audience. So I'm going to ask Deborah and then Win to talk about their coaching that they offer and how they got into it, because, you know, they were founders who came from corporate. So they have the same, if you will, in some cases, transition issues that many new founders have. So Deb and then Win.
I think there's no escaping the transition issues from going from corporate to entrepreneurship. And after a 20-year career at Gartner, where I was chartered with product development, product management, and product marketing in the advisory services space, I thought I knew how to launch things, and I did. But this new world of online marketing is a much different animal. And no matter what your expertise is, whatever your specialty is, it can be challenging to figure out, what do I offer? How do I position myself in the marketplace, which is becoming ever more crowded? Coaching is a $16 billion industry. Consulting is a $264 billion industry. And there have been there's never been a time in history when more businesses were launched in such a short period of time. So I think the biggest challenge that new businesses have is, how do you stand out in what has turned out to be a fairly crowded market? And how do you position yourself to grow predictably? And it's kind of where I geek out on the data of how you can grow predictably so that you're adding 6 or 7 figures to your top line year after year. So it was a rocky road at first. It took me a while to dial in my ideal client, dial in my offers, dial in my positioning and my messaging. But in the last 3 years, our business has grown 80% year over year. So I feel like we've dialed that in fairly well.
Great. Win, what about you?
So as you mentioned in my intro, I began work in the corporate world doing internal consulting at Citibank, and then strategic planning at JP Morgan. And then I was a consultant in the consulting division of PricewaterhouseCoopers. In that, between those jobs, I got involved with the whole transition from one job to another. And as well as getting interested in the result of a new position, I was very excited to get involved with what's involved in moving from one place to another. So the place that I like to step in is when people are up in the air, maybe about what they're going to do, or as far as a position, or maybe just what they're going to do as the next step in their job. And so I get involved on a strategic level with people who are trying to figure out what's next and a little bit about how to make that happen. So those of you who are joining us in video, thank you very much. So I'd be interested to hear some of the questions that you have about that drew you to this call, because I want to make a distinction that may help. When I think of coaching, obviously I think of sports teams and all of that. But one of the things that distinguishes coaching from consulting is that consulting involves providing expertise and answers and ways to make things happen. And coaching may provide some of that, but the real focus of coaching is on asking questions. The assumption of a coaching model is that you have the answers. And I believe that you do have the answers. And what those of us who are coaches can do is to give you perspective on that, get a little more dispassionate view of what's going on. And so it would be interesting to me to hear what is going on with you, and then perhaps we can throw out some ideas about how that we work with that.
Yeah.
Okay, so why don't we do this? I'm going to ask people to put some of their questions into the chat, and I will be checking the chat as we talk. So this way we can have a continuous flow, and at the same time I will try to integrate their questions into the questions that I ask you both. And actually, I was assigned also to talk about accountability circles and peer coaching. So I'm just going to mention very briefly that the idea of accountability circles and peer coaching is actually peer-to-peer meetings where people bring up issues or they have a specific topic, and then everyone actually shares their experience with that issue. And for peer coaching, my understanding is for peer coaching to work correctly, it really helps to have people at the same level or stage of their business, whether it's the beginning business or whether it's, a year in or 2 years in and so on. And there are organizations like Goldman Sachs that also even will provide not a coaching, but a program more like what Deborah provides. Okay, so the good news, if I can say, is that I actually am seeing that, I'm seeing that Emily Kalbick has just joined us, so I'm going to make her a founder. But while I'm doing that, make her a moderator, but while I'm doing that, I want to ask each of our two coaches here, or two coaches, coach leader. Do you feel every founder could benefit from a coach or a support group or a program? So can you speak to that? First, Deborah, and then Win, and I'll be right back so I can take care of Emily.
Yeah, I believe coaching is super important, and we can make a distinction between coaching and mentorship. As Wynn said, coaching is about bringing out the answers inside of you. Sometimes you don't know what those answers are, and mentorship is the right way to go. So the first step is clarity on what you already know, what's working, and what you need to be successful. And with all this talk about niching, and niching down and being a specialist in your market in order to stand out, the first step in growing a business or starting a business is identifying that gap in the market, that problem that you solve, the problem that needs a solution that no one is solving or no one is solving well, and to use your investigative skills to match the need in the market with a problem that you can solve. So packaging your service offerings, I'm talking to service providers here, in a way that you can offer a solution that has a distinct return on advantage. So that is a term I've coined to talk about what is the ultimate value of what you offer. So for me, it's finding the gap. How do your skills match that gap? How do you package, price, and message your service offerings? With that key business foundation, it will be very difficult for you to attract clients into your ecosystem who want to do business with you. So that's where I think you start. I've always had a coach. I take great pleasure and really reverence in choosing my coach, because I coach for an entire year. So it's important to me, as Betty mentioned, that there's a cohort there, that there's accountability as well as skills building. So there's stretching me as a founder and a CEO, there's building my skills, and then there's getting support in how I reach my goals and grow my team. So coaching has always been super important to me and something that I invest in every year.
And Wynn, what about you? Do you feel every founder would benefit from a coach or a peer support group or even an accelerator?
So all of those things are valuable, and I would not be a person who would say that you would need all of them all the time. I also have used a coach over long periods of time and then switched away from it and gone more to a peer coaching group. And then I also have had over time mentors from time to time. All of these, if you think of Venn diagrams, all of these overlap in providing some of the same needs. And so the key thing is, the thing that obviously all of these things share is that you're not doing it on your own. It's so easy to be self-delusional and to have some great ideas and to be moving forward with them. But without that input from other people, we're never going to be as good as we could be with that input.
Right. So one of the things that Emily and I were inspired about was actually when we thought of this program, we were watching the Olympics. And, every star athlete has a coach. And then we thought about all these corporate CEOs, and many of them have coaches and mentors. So we thought, well, why not our startup founder? Shouldn't they have help in terms of, getting different perspective and in terms of being able to speak with someone who might be knowledgeable, and, to Wynn and Deborah's point, having somebody who's been there or having somebody that is at the same level as you can really help your business, can really stretch you that extra mile. And I want to say that actually Stage 2 Startups, as the founder, I also have a coach, actually a score coach. Actually, I went through a series of score coaches until I found the one that I actually liked. So just for those of you who are not aware of SCORE, it's a government organization, it's a public-private partnership where the government pays for this part of this organization's expenses so that they can have volunteers coach or mentor startup founders. And so you too can actually get your local score coach if you like. Or, and I have actually done this too, you can actually go and find a brilliant coach that specializes in a certain area and pay them, in some cases, hundreds of dollars or thousands of dollars. And I've equally experience with doing that, as well as actually joining an accountability circle so that my peers coach me. So like Deborah, and as Wynn mentioned, I actually also have gone through exposure in terms of having a personal coach, having a group coach, and even going through an accelerated program. So I basically have, in my background, done a lot of it and would be happy to discuss that further. But Emily, are you ready to take over as our moderator?
Yes, my apologies. Nothing like having your internet fail you. But I've built a close relationship with my Verizon support guy. So hopefully it is stabilized now. So I apologize, everyone. I'm not quite sure where you were in the conversation when I could finally get on and hear, but I was listening basically to the end of what you were saying, Betty, and I heard some of what you said, Wynn. You know, I hear a lot, people will say, oh, you know, I can find whatever I need on the internet. Everything's on the internet. So could you talk a little about why there's value in a founder using a coach such as yourselves or some of these other things that Betty, you touched on, versus that more ad hoc, informal, Google is my friend approach to running a business?
Who would you like to start?
I'll jump in. I mean, I think there's too much information available, actually. And the danger is, and I'll use the doctor analogy again, is misdiagnosing your symptoms and going for the wrong solution. So sometimes you might think you have a sales problem. And so you might be searching online for, you know, free sales advice. Where is there a sales course where I can learn how to be a better closer? When in actuality, it could be something further up the chain. Maybe it's just your value proposition isn't distinguished enough. And so the danger with doing free resources is that you can struggle longer and delay revenue. So what I'd like to do is being able to diagnose the specific problem, the specific challenge, and whether you need an accelerator, an incubator, a launch lab to get you started, and then you want to hone in on specific skills, then I would look for an expert who's an expert in marketing or positioning, an expert who's an expert in sales, or maybe there's some other subject matter expertise that you need. But you know, sometimes we don't see ourselves too clearly. And so what do-it-yourself solutions can do is actually delay revenue and delay your success. So working with a professional who can help diagnose where's the hole in your business strategy or where's the hole in your implementation plan can be very useful.
Thank you. Wynn, do you have anything to add to that?
I agree with that 100%. I'm just thinking down the line, one of the reasons that you may not feel like you can sign up with a coach is that you wonder about you're saving your pennies. And one of the things to be sure that you should know is that there is no shame in asking a coach what they charge and how they set up their relationship. So then you don't have to guess whether or not it would be a good idea. The other thing is that you can go in diagnostically. Deborah usefully brought out the fact that there are very specific things that you may want to find out about, and they're general things. And you can make an objective for yourself and go to the coach and say, this is what I'd like to work with you on. You may only meet with them once until, like Betty, you find the one that you like. Or you may meet with them, and if they're pricey for whatever you consider pricey, then you may meet with them less frequently than you would otherwise. There's nothing that guarantees that a weekly meeting is any better than bi-weekly or monthly. kind of depends on what your needs are.
Right. And now, Betty, talk a little bit about stage 2. It's not a coaching per se, but it is a different approach for providing support to the founder.
Right, right. So stage 2 is an organization that's focused on your older entrepreneur, your person that's already had some sort of professional experience. And we actually do sort of an ad hoc, if you will, peer coaching opportunity. We do have that because we have our monthly water coolers. And so our next monthly water cooler is April 13th, and people just kind of drop in to get feedback on an idea or test an idea or to even get market research questions answered. And we are actually looking at developing an accountability or peer coaching circle, possibly for startup founders, because we were asked specifically by people, several people who've come to our events to put something together. And this was because in effect, there are a lot of programs out there, but a lot of them are for instance, in Deborah's case, only for women, or in some cases only for Black women. And what we find is that there is also a need to be more, if you will, inclusive. So we also find, Deb, that we actually have a whole bunch of men that show up at stage 2 startup events. And so we're trying to look into the option of developing some peer coaching where people are focusing on just helping each other out as they start on the journey of becoming entrepreneurs. And if people want to just kind of like do a trial, they can actually join our monthly, okay, all right, somebody, we have to mute whoever that is. They can join.
I would ask people, if you're not talking, perhaps you could mute yourself and then we can contain any background noise.
Right. So, so we do have a monthly, if you will, like peer water cooler session for people to actually ask questions of each other. And yeah, stage 2, for this, after today's session, we actually have a half hour where you folks can meet each other and learn more about each other's businesses and potentially, you know, just get together and coach each other too. So that is some of what we do to help people learn from each other.
Right. I have to speak for myself, having been in one of those accountability groups. It does keep you accountable. You know, you do feel you need to report out. So you do have to sit there and go, oh, I have to say something on Thursday. I better go do something. I'm going to ask all of you, do you feel startup founders have unique needs from your average business person you might be coaching? And if so, how do you address those needs? Win, I'll ask you first.
So I'm going to flip that very quickly to Deborah, since I focus more widely than she does. And she has the specific startup focus in her practice. I am happy to answer general questions and to work with people in that way, but I don't pretend to provide, except from my experience, which I haven't talked about, of how I develop my business. And I have helped people develop their business, but Deborah, over to you.
Oh, thank you, Win. I'm not sure it's a thank you, but anyway. So, you know, startup or any business, you know, what's the startup? We're not talking necessarily about tech startups. I think 80% of the new businesses that have been started up in the last few years have been actually services-based businesses. And 88% of those women-owned businesses are earning less than $100,000 a year. So I think we start there. It's that when you first start out, how do you get clarity into the money-making model? You know, and that is, what am I offering? What's the value of that? What am I charging for that? And I think that women inherently undercharge their services. I happen to be in a cohort with a few men, and it's not like I don't work with men. I do work with men sometimes privately, and certainly men join our free training sessions all the time. But in a startup situation, you need to build a basic business foundation. When you're already an established business, you're looking at their growth track, you're adding team, you're building in a different type of foundation to scale. Maybe you're a founder with an exit strategy and you want to make sure that you're building assets that have value over time so that you can sell and exit the business. So I'm not quite sure. It's kind of a general question, but Emily, if you want to go deeper on that about aspects of the startup life that are challenging.
Yeah, I think that would be useful, because I think as people, particularly people who have worked extensive period in an
Corporate.
organization and now
Yeah.
are out on their own, they might be facing different types of challenges, and how do
Right.
you handle that?
Yeah, so maybe you have subject matter expertise and now you're CEO, chief sales officer, chief marketing officer, and chief financial officer of your company. So that can be somewhat overwhelming. So I think the first step is not be overwhelmed and understand which of the dials am I turning that are driving the growth revenue engine.
Yeah, I like
And-
to, Emily, can I jump in just a
Well,
little
that's what I
bit?
was going to ask you, Betty, if you'd want to add to that.
Yes, I was actually talking to some people at the Securities and Exchange Commission a couple of weeks back. And we were talking about the fact that a lot of startup founders have in some cases, the need to raise capital. And it's not something that you generally have when you're working in a 9-to-5 job, or even, and they laughed about this, even if you're the CEO of a Fortune 500 company, because raising capital as a Fortune 500 company is very different than raising capital for a much smaller company. And so they do have, I think, some unique needs that people who are in the everyday workplace may not encounter. The fact that they might have to raise money from their friends and family, the fact that they may have to go to strangers like angels and venture capitalists and raise money from them. These are not things that, you know, you can ordinarily just walk down the street and find somebody to teach you. It's actually quite challenging. And so I do think that some startup founders, depending on what industry they're in, may have some bigger challenges than other founders might. So again, going back to what Deborah said, if you're in a service business, you can probably open up your business, you know, within 24 hours, I think. And through LegalZoom, you can incorporate your business and get started. But if you are in biotech, or if you are in food, or if you are planning to open a restaurant, because so many restaurants have gone out of business, and you have a great idea for serving somebody some great dish, there are different types of challenges, and there are unique needs which may be better served for you to actually talk to a coach or an incubator in your particular industry. And just as an aside, I actually do coaching, but I only coach people who are looking to raise capital for their business. So I don't do anything else because I think other people are better at it. But I can come from the perspective of someone who's actually raised capital, and raised capital from family members, raised capital from angels. So I can understand that perspective. I have friends who are venture capitalists. So yeah, I think if you have a specific need, you should really look into finding out how somebody can help you get to where you need to go, because they might be able to give you shortcuts that could save you a lot of time, and in some cases, a lot of money, right, Deborah? Because there are a lot of people out there who are coaching, and they may not actually have the right skills for what you need, for what your specific business needs.
So to that point, is that when one is thinking about finding that independent third party to help identify those needs, et cetera, to be seeking out kind of the ad hoc approach. I need to raise money. Let me find somebody who's an expert at that. I need help with sales. Let me seek out an expert for that, versus maybe entering a program that with a coach that's helping you through the whole process. What are the pros and cons of those two? Because sometimes having a coach through the whole process, the person has more understanding and depth of knowledge of your overall organization, and helping you through. So any thoughts on those two different approaches?
I could say it works both ways. A way that I usually take on my the people I coach when they are at a loose end. And then for many of them, they stick with me. And once they're positioned, either starting their own work, their own projects, or working for somebody else, they have worked with me, I understand them, and they come back for that. And they may go to other people in the meantime for the specialty, because you need both.
So you're arguing that it's worth any entrepreneur to invest in both of those types of support systems because you actually need.
Yeah, and again, to go back, some of it can be a group, right? A peer group can be very valuable. And then I don't think that there's any predictable way to say what you're going to need, how often, or when.
So to that point, I'll just open up and ask questions like, how does a person determine which coaching approach is right for them? I know, Deb, you once made a comment on some other thing we were both involved in, where you mentioned that people would be coming to you who had spent a lot of money on other types of support that really weren't appropriate for them. So how does one avoid that and really find that full support that they need?
You know, it's so hard to know what you don't know. And right, if we all had a crystal ball, right? So I think there's a place for consuming online education and free resources, but there's also a place for understanding that I don't have the basic startup skills to put in place a growth engine to start converting clients, because you can have an LLC, you can have a website, but unless you're actually converting sales, you don't have a business. So I think that's number one. Do I have the basic things in place? And there's the trouble is there's a lot of people out there who say, you know, I'm a business strategist, you know, when in effect, they learned how to use Instagram and get a bunch of followers and can teach you how to get more followers on Instagram. That's not a business strategist. So I think it's being a smart consumer. So what we've done is through the free training that I offer is highlight, you know, educate people on what the basic business foundation building blocks are. And that if you don't have those in place, then join us in the launch lab. You know, in 4 months, you'll have your basic business foundation. You will be able to go out there, go to market and start getting new clients. Then after that was really my clients who were the impetus for launching the 6-figure accelerator. There was like, Deb, this is great. I want to get better at sales. How do I dial in my marketing? How should I be creating more awareness out there with my ideal clients in my market? So I did a combination. So I have a good broad range of skills. I've been in sales, I've been in product marketing, I've been in marketing communications, I've developed product, but I don't know everything. I'm not an expert speaker from the stage. I'm not a book writer. I am not an expert at content strategy or content creation. So what we did in the accelerator was, because I understand my clients, I know them really well. Most of us have been together for more than a year. I bring in those experts from my network who they can then go off with and go do a deep dive in branding or do a deep dive in a TED Talk and go on the stage. So I think having vetted resources is really important to people so that they have a trusted community of experts that they can work with at any given point in time. So that's kind of how I approach it. I'm sure there's other ways.
And Betty, Wynn, anyone want to add to that?
No, sounds very sensible to me.
Yes, I think that Deb's right on the spot there.
Okay. Do you think that founders should be seeking out coaches who also have experience of being a founder, or is it really just the general skill set that is what you should be looking for?
So can I, let me jump in there. I actually think it really depends what the background of the founder is, and whether the skill set that is necessary makes sense or not. So for instance, I am not an accountant by any any imagination whatsoever. But accounting is something, or bookkeeping and accounting are something that's very, unless you're doing creative accounting like our ex-president, it's very straightforward. So whether you're whether you have a coach that to help you with your accounting, doesn't matter whether that coach is actually a like beginner, I mean, like a startup accounting coach, or someone from corporate America, because accounting is the same in every sense of, it really is the same. However, recently a person approached me about starting a nonprofit. And so I used to actually be on a board of several nonprofits, and I actually worked for a nonprofit, and she knew nothing about a nonprofit, yet she wanted to start a nonprofit. So I connected her to other nonprofit board members and nonprofit founders, because I think it really is important for that person to understand, what it is they're getting into. So I think it really depends on the, what the question is that you need the coaching about.
Anybody else to add to that?
No, it's the same thing. I wish there were a formula. And the only thing that I will reiterate that I said earlier is experiment. It is cheap to call up somebody and talk to them for 20 minutes, which most coaches will do. And it's not even that expensive to try them out once for an hour if they offer that.
That's very good advice.
And I think just to add, one more thing, Emily, is just be wary of cookie cutter approaches. Hey, I've discovered this system, this tool, this framework. It made me $1 million. I'll teach it to you and you'll make $1 million too. That rarely happens.
Where do I sign up?
I know, right?
I could use that.
We all would.
So I'm going to ask her, so for your particular type of coaching, what is the type of person, or where in their process would they be seeking out a coach such as yourself? Can you talk a little bit about that? How would I know that you're the type of person, or you're the person I should be reaching out to?
So I would say initially is where you'd want to reach out to me, where you're maybe not sure of what product you're offering, let alone which business model you're using, or where you have a couple of different audiences you could serve, or where you are perhaps could do one thing that would be part-time and another that would take all of your time. All of those kinds of decisions about the big movements are the places where most people come on board with me.
And then after you talk to Win, you want to come over and join me, because then you have an idea that you want to bring to market. And that's what we want to do is we want to make sure that that there's demand before you build supply. We want to talk to the people in the marketplace that you would be serving. And we want to get curious and find what a great solution would look like to them. And that's how you create innovative solutions. That's how you create innovative market positions and innovative marketing that help you stand out from the crowd. And so, once you get that clarity, if you don't have any clarity on what you want to do, I'm not going to be really helpful to you. But if you say, Deb, I've got this direction I want to pursue, I'm not really quite sure how to bring that idea to market, then I've got a process. It's not a formula. It's not a follow me, do what I do. It's more of here's the structure and the framework for you to figure out where you want to take your unique skills and apply them on this new problem.
And what about you, Betty? When should they be turning to the types of offerings that Stage 2 offers?
Okay, well, Stage 2 sort of like spans what Win does and what Deb does. And then actually after what Deb does too. But we span it in like the way we're doing it today. We introduce resources. So we introduce Deb as a resource. We introduce Win as a resource. We introduce SCORE as a resource. We have partnered with Goldman Sachs 10,000 small businesses for people who are like 2 years into their business and they want to improve or expand their growth strategies. So we actually introduce founders to all kinds of resources. And as I mentioned before, we also do it for people who are starting nonprofits as well as for-profits. And we provide input in terms of connections to other entrepreneurs that we know who might be open to mentoring or just sharing information or sharing opportunities. So when you come to stage 2, it's actually a place like the library that has a lot of different resources. And then we reach out to experts like Win and Deborah to help you connect with them and to refine your resources, or whether it's SCORE or some other organization. And we are actually exploring, for those people who are interested, creating accountability circles within our network so that people can help each other in terms of growing their business and taking it to, whatever the next step is. So with stage 2, we try to connect you with experts. We try to connect you with entrepreneurs. So we do a little bit of both. And, our hope is that we can share information with you so that you can grow your business, and no matter what stage it's at, no matter what type of idea or opportunity it might be. Does that answer that question, Emily?
Sure. So you did touch on, you said something about nonprofits versus for-profit. So it just raises a question in my mind. Is there a difference if somebody, for example, Deb, is coming to you with a physical product versus a service, or Betty, a nonprofit versus a for-profit? Is there a difference in the type of coaching that person should seek, or is it that it's pretty universal regardless of whether it's for-profit, nonprofit, whatever industry?
Well, from a nonprofit for-profit perspective, a nonprofit doesn't make any money and it has different operating rules. So a nonprofit requires having a board.
So I don't want to get into that,
right,
the technical, but rather as a coaching or reaching.
I think it really depends. A lot of nonprofits are very much like small startups and small businesses, because the majority of nonprofits are small nonprofits, and the larger ones can be larger nonprofits can be billion-dollar operations like the Red Cross, and they operate in many ways like a Fortune 500, except that they don't pay taxes. So there are differences in terms of the nonprofit for-profit industry, and some of the accounting is different. I don't think, and to Deb's credit, I don't think, for instance, the branding or the mission, all of that a nonprofit or a for-profit can limit themselves by going to Deb's program. I think it's probably equally applicable. And the same with Win. If they're starting off, I think it's equally applicable. The only thing that would be different are some of the legal issues and reporting requirements and corporate structure and things like that. So, but I think overall, it could be very much the same, except when it comes to raising capital. Nonprofits raise money very differently than for-profits. And so again, it really depends on, what you want to do and where you're going and how big you want to be and so on. But there are differences.
What about products versus services, or the types of products? Any thoughts on, do you need to seek a different type of coach in those scenarios? Deb, Win?
I'd say yes. Well, first of all, to Betty's point, I think more nonprofits need to operate as for-profit companies. They'd be a lot more successful raising donor money. But yes, I mean, when you're dealing with a product versus a service, you have many, many different challenges, right? So you have supply chain issues, you have manufacturing issues. So I think when you are launching a business that has a physical product, you want a coach who has expertise in growing and scaling businesses based on physical products. I have a lot of friends who are startup founders of physical product companies, and we get together, we have great conversations. Their challenges are very, very different than those that my clients face.
Right, many of them have to raise capital, or
Yeah,
they have to write big checks.
Yeah, they're raising millions of dollars in order to fund their businesses. They're beholding to investors, and they have distribution, marketing, sales challenges, supply chain challenges that a coach or consultant doesn't have.
Oh, Emily, I see there's a question for everyone. It says, the question is, what do you recommend using as, what do you recommend using as building blocks or the first step for starting a business, or a balance of skills versus within a changing marketplace?
I was going to hold that for Q&A, but let's address it now.
Oh, okay. I thought we were going into Q&A now. Sorry
Well,
about that.
Right, but that's fine. Let's move to Q&A. Thank you, Betty. I know that Deb, you actually asked Valerie what industry, and she said communications, public media relations, cross-platform writing. So can anybody want to take a step at ask her question of what do you recommend using as the building blocks or balance of skills versus changing marketplace?
Whoops, Deb, you're
Valerie,
mute.
if you want to unmute, we can talk about it.
Hi. Well, I bring it up because it's an interesting a question in terms of balancing an industry that is basically has a lot of people entering in who might not even be professionally dedicated or trained because of social media. So your question about your approach of solving a problem is an interesting one. I feel there are a lot of people in the communications world, maybe more than even needed in some ways, or, so it's gotten had to have sort of gray edges, if you will. So I was just kind of curious in terms of approaching, having a certain skill base and everybody jumping on the boat, the communications boat, if there were any thoughts around that. And granted, it's sort of an open-ended question.
Yeah. So a part of it is, what problem do you want to solve? What do you want to be known for? What is your secret sauce that makes you different? So the world on the outside is always changing, and you may have generalist skills, but there's very specific problems that start emerging that are causing challenges for people who could be ideal clients. So if you can narrow in on what those challenges are that you're passionate about solving. And I'm being vague because it could be, let's just use the issue of nonprofits. Nonprofits are struggling in a time where there's rampant inflation, there's, political disruption. Maybe it's harder to get money out of donors. So why would they work with you to create a standout value proposition or use public and media relations to elevate themselves? So you have to kind of look at your own messaging and your own positioning in your own market and say, what is the current problem that I want to solve? Knowing that you have generalist skills and you could solve a lot of different problems, but not every problem needs an Instagram reel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Did that make sense?
Yes, thank you. It's yeah, it makes total sense for, strategically approaching a business. Finding the answer to that question is still challenging, however, but it's good advice. Thank you.
Yeah. I'd be happy to, schedule a one-on-one at a later date to dive deeper.
Right. The other thing, Valerie, that you could do is perhaps you should get a bunch of your peers and you could help each other try to figure out, what is your special calling card, because sometimes it's very difficult to like analyze ourselves. But if you have dispassionate peers who might be able to help you and who know your skills, then they might actually be able to articulate what you're good at, because sometimes we're just too close. And I find that it's true for me that Emily and I actually engaged a branding coach a few weeks back, because even though we're both marketers, we find that, we're too opinionated about what we should be doing to kind of look at the whole market in the spectrum of from a third person perspective. So sometimes it helps to just have other people to help you. And that's part of what we're trying to do at stage 2. We try to introduce you to other people. And we also try to help you find peers that work in similar industries, but are not exactly competitors, so that potentially you could help each other.
Right. No, I think peer groups are great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Val. Does anybody else have a question? You could either, unmute and just, ask it, or if you want to type it in the chat, but we certainly have about 5 minutes that we could answer some of the questions.
So I have a question for my fellow speakers. I heard in the very beginning that business is up, and I was just wondering, is that because of COVID? I have seen in the business media that in the last 2 years, there has been a record number of new businesses that have started. So do you find that this is part of the reason why business is up? Deborah and Wynn, is that what's going on, or is something else happening that you know about that we should know about?
I don't have any magic solutions.
But are you finding more people? Sorry, are you finding more people?
Well, I have a business model that's built on making revenue growth predictable. So it's hard to tell, is it the market on the outside that's driving growth, or is it the business practices that we've instilled on the inside that's driving growth? So it's probably a little bit of both. But I believe anyone can dial in a strategy of predictable revenue growth once you understand what those levers of growth are, right? And so it's, product, value proposition, sales skills on the team, how good the service offering is, and does it get clients results? Do they keep coming back? How predictable can you make your business model? Because we all feel like there's some mystery to growth out there, and it's a roll of the dice. And what I realized is, if I analyze my own behavior, and I'll just use an example from my own business, over the last 4 or 5 years, I've probably closed $1 million worth of business from webinars alone. So way before COVID, before Zoom, I was using this technology platform to educate and inform my audience and make offers for people to work with me. So nothing changed for me in COVID. I just doubled down on what was already working. And then I decided that, well, if this works, if I give more talks on other people's platforms, we call them OPPs in the accelerator, then I could also drive and escalate more predictable growth in my business, which was absolutely 100% true. So there's certain metrics that we look for, and that is, what is your client conversion rate? How many conversations do you need to have in order for someone to say yes to working with you? And then what are those behaviors that you're exhibiting, and how do you dial in a conversation that really converts? So that's a combination of getting good in your speaking skills, how to educate, inform, and transition to making authentic offers. And then how do you dial in your skills as a salesperson, or outsource those skills to someone else who's selling for you? So that's there's only so many levers for growth. So if you're measuring all of those, you can be a solopreneur. And, a good friend, Elaine Potfeld, really recently wrote another book, but her first book was The $1 Million One-Person Business, with a skeleton, fractional freelance staff. you can grow to $1 million services-based business.
Great, thank you. We're actually coming to the end of our hour. So one last chance, any words of advice or short insights that you'd like to give the people
Well,
on tonight?
We haven't talked as much directly about coaching, but
Mhm.
I wrote up a bunch of questions that I'm going to put in the chat. They're way too many for a chat, but if you just copy the chat, you'll be able to see them. But anyway, it's a way of thinking about in this way of coaching that might be helpful for you to coach yourself or to figure out what kind of coach you might need.
Terrific, thank you. This is these are fantastic, Wynn. I think this will be useful for anyone. So thank you for that.
And we'll make sure it's sent to everybody in the post panel discussion follow-up, where we will also share the contact information for Deb and Wynn.
Right. All right.
Oh,
So-
Deb, maybe Deb has a few words.
Nope.
Nope.
Not really. I think I've said a lot of words.
She feels worded out.
Okay,
And
all right.
just,
So
I
with
think
that,
the biggest thing
let's-
is just get out of your own way.
and Betty, do you have anything before I bring this to a close?
Oh, okay. Well, first I have to say I appreciate everyone hanging in there and helping me with both my moderating and panelist skills. I think I mixed them a couple of times, but I want to encourage people to use Stage 2 startups as a resource so that we can actually help you perhaps find the coach or the program that you need. And as I mentioned earlier, we're also going to try to create a program ourselves based on the research that we've been conducting in terms of peer coaching, just to help people get started. And if you have any questions, feel free to email us at info@stage2startups. And on April 13th, we have our monthly virtual water cooler. So if you feel like us popping in and visiting for free, you can just come in and join and take a look for our announcement on Eventbrite and come and ask your questions and see what kind of information you get back from your peers.
Great, thank you. And on behalf, first, thank you everyone for your patience and me actually getting online. Thank you, Wynn, Deb, and Betty, for your great insights. I think it was a great conversation. And as Betty mentioned, for everyone, you will receive tomorrow a short survey, which we ask that you complete, and it will give you an opportunity to say how you could reach out to Deb or Wynn or Stage 2. And we'll include these great questions, Wynn, that you put in the chat. With that, I'll bring this part to a close, but those who are interested, please stay on. We have a half hour of very informal networking. It gives you an opportunity to meet some of the other people who are on the call. If you have to leave, we totally understand, but if you can stay, we'd love to meet you. So with that, thank you. And we will see who wants to say. We'll give a minute for people to either sign off or stay on.
Right, and I think Deborah has to leave. So we wish Deborah a great trip wherever she's going tomorrow. And for those of you who are, I don't know where. So Austin. Yes, have a great trip to Austin, a fun city. And those of you who are staying to do networking, feel free to unmute yourself and to show your photo if you like. And, we will just do introductions and answer any questions you might have or whatever.
Thank you, Betty and Emily. Nice to meet you, Wynn. Take care,
Likewise.
everyone.
Bye, Deb. So Irina and Kit, do you want to unmute and
Or
show
perhaps
yourself?
even show yourself if you want to
Yes.
be part of the conversation.
Hi, I'm Kit. I called in from Brisbane, Australia. Nice to
From where?
meet you.
Excuse me, from where?
Yeah, Brisbane, Australia.
Brisbane,
Oh, wow.
Australia. Oh,
Brisbane.
wow, nice.
Yeah, yeah. I clicked into this one because I've just signed up to start out and I'm still navigating around and just trying to find where I need to be. But this is the second meeting that I've been a part of, and I found them really interesting. A lot of food for